Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of On My Mind. In this episode, I'm joined by my good friend Cheryl, who is described by her clients as a relationship pattern interrupter, and that's certainly true, and I can see why after speaking with her. I've known Cheryl for about 3 years now. We follow each other on Instagram, and it's the first time that we've sat down and had a really long conversation about the things that are important to her. Cheryl shares her journey so vulnerably and so openly that it really kind of put hairs on the back of my neck at several points. I'm delighted that she accepted my invitation to be a guest on the podcast, and I think that you will feel that sense of gratitude too when you finish listening. She's so passionate about what she does, and it's really obvious that she's done the inner work herself. So you can expect to hear about her personal journey, and also there's some takeaways that she shares about how you can heal your own relationships too. So listen out for those at the end. Otherwise, all that's left to say from me is that there are some emotional themes in it, so look after yourself when listening, but otherwise just relax, enjoy the insights, and enjoy the infectious energy of this beautiful, beautiful woman.
The only thing I could liken it to is like being hit by a truck. It's like a moment in my mind that's been erased now because it was quite a traumatic experience.
One human is amazingly complex. You add a second human and try to have a relationship, and how complicated things get.
Suddenly, I feel like all of my history was a lie.
There's nothing wrong with you, right? You're not bad or wrong or broken or, stuck, and it's all healable.
People's stories have the power to transform the way we see the world and the way we experience our lives. When we delve deep within ourselves, we all have the potential to become aware, and with awareness comes choice. I'm your host, Adam, and I'll be guiding you on this journey. So sit back, relax, and find out this week what is on my mind.
They run a business, the people who own this house, and the Wi-Fi is like magic. So
Yeah, no, there's absolutely no contention or anything, and I guess you can hear me clearly.
Perfect. Yeah.
I've got a microphone here that's out of shot.
Yeah, your sounds. Is my sound shit, or is it not too bad?
No, it sounds good. It sounds really good. I'm actually obviously, I'm a perfectionist, so that's why I was getting
Hello.
perfectionist. So that's why I was getting all precious about the audio. But actually, I think I've got my computer plugged into the Ethernet, and you've got supersonic Wi-Fi, so we're good to go, aren't we?
Amazing.
So it is nice to finally get to chat to you, because we've followed each other on Instagram, I reckon now for about 2 or 3 years, maybe.
I think it has been 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and back then you weren't doing what you're doing now. I think you were doing something very different about kind of books, and you were just tailing that off. So do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your kind of your what you're doing now, and then we'll go over kind of what got you to that point?
Sure. Wow. Yeah, you've been in my world for a little while, haven't you? 2, 3 years. So yeah, I did transition into relationship work, which is really what I'm here to do. I really feel like it's my soul's work, if you will, if you believe in all of that side of stuff. And yeah, I was doing publicity before that, which I was very good at. It was my zone of excellence, you could say, but I didn't like it. And at the end, it just really felt like a day job I didn't want, even though I was working for myself. So what I decided to do was transition into relationships, and no surprises, there was a big trigger for that. So I had a very karmic / toxic relationship about 2 years ago that really prompted me to dive deep into my own relationship stuff. I've been doing the work for a decade, but the relationship side of thing, it got to a point where I really, really had to look at it. And when I very, very quickly moved through that, I realized that I wanted to teach other people to do the same, because relationships is where a lot of us are stuck. So yeah, former publicist, now relationship pattern interrupter, and this feels so much better.
So you mentioned that the publishing stuff was your zone of excellence, but you still wanted to, you kind of felt like it wasn't right, because a lot of people would say if they're in their zone of excellence, if they're in flow, then that's their kind of sweet spot, that's what they want to do. What was it that kind of, was it a niggle? Was it just sort of a sense of not wanting to do the routine of a day job? What was it that
Yeah,
throughout
it was a number of different things, and there wasn't one like aha moment, one really, amazing moment where everything just slotted into place. It was a series of things. So I've been self-employed since about 2014, which is when I quit my corporate career in publicity, and I set up on my own. And in those first 3 years in business, I was doing a kind of a smorgasbord, a mixture between business coaching, publicity, book publishing. It was all kind of amalgamated together, and I was working with people who were coaches, therapists, healers, people who were doing this work. And because I've been doing the inner work since about 2009, 2010, and that started when I was living in Canada. Because I've done a lot of inner work, I really realized that it was now time for me to the image I'm getting is like, on an iPhone where you flip the camera and the camera switches around to face outwards instead of inwards. It was like that, but the opposite way around.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like I was putting the camera on someone else saying, let me help you get the message out there about your great work and your work in psychology and coaching. And then it was gradually over time, I realized that I should be teaching on this and the camera should be facing me and not facing the other people I was getting out into the world. So it was a gradual thing. And really, now that I'm working in relationships, it's so intuitive to me and so natural to me. And it feels like everything I've been through has sort of led up to this point of coming to this work. And it's nice because publicity is obviously a good skill set to have. It's handy running a business, of course, but it never felt like that's what I'm going to do my whole life. There was always something that felt like this is going really well and I have the career and it looks really great from the outside, but it doesn't really feel that good inside. Whereas now it does feel really good. And I feel like I'm, actually helping people and making a difference.
So when you were kind of helping all those people publish their books and everything, and you said you came to realize that the camera should be facing you, do you think that was a kind of a bit of projection on your side to kind of like throwing everything into other people, and actually what you wanted was somebody or yourself to throw you into you, if that makes sense?
I've never heard it described that way. You're a really, really good therapist. Yeah, that probably was what was happening. And I think subconsciously part of me felt that towards the end, because I just felt a bit, what's the word? Just a bit irritated, really, that I wasn't really the one that was stepping up and stepping onto stages, either metaphorically or literally. And I felt like it was time. And with what I'd learned about relationships, I just started talking about it. And I remember one event in particular, I actually flew over to LA in the States and went to this event. And I started talking about what I'd been through in relationships. And there was, I was talking to 2 different women. And then I looked up and there was 10 women around me. Then I looked up again and there was 15. And I looked up again and there was 20. And there was this half moon crescent of women around me asking me all these questions about what I'd been through. And I guess that if there was one moment, that would be my moment where I realized, hang on a second, I need to be talking about this work and doing so really publicly. And so that was, let me get my years right. That was spring of 2017, I think that's right. And, I decided then to phase out my publicity business within 6 months, and I did it in 3 months because I'm an overachiever. And I really just felt accelerated and felt like I needed to it wasn't so much getting out of publicity, it was getting into relationships. It's not that I was pushing away from publicity, it's that I was being pulled towards the relationship side. So that's how it was for me.
So it sounds like a very different pull, whereas in the publishing side, there might have been some projecting of your own stuff there. The relationships felt more like a sort of a natural pull into this is my work. And you said soul work. This is the sort of stuff of your soul.
Yeah.
Anybody following you on Instagram will note that your language is quite spiritual. You use a lot of spiritual words, and clocking, you said earlier, not toxic relationship, karmic relationship. Yeah. What did you mean by that?
Okay, so it's interesting because I have a really interesting relationship with spirituality in that I think that it's beautiful and it's a big part of my journey. I also know and have observed that a lot of people misuse it. So they'll say things like, oh, this person's a soulmate, or this person is, the one, or they'll say, oh, I've known this person in a past life. I mean, you may or may not have done, but if you're not being treated well in that relationship, we need to be really grounded in that and look at why that is. So there's that. And also, yeah, my spiritual practice is really important to me. And what I believe is that we've all been here before. it just doesn't make sense that we're just here once and what we just go and disappear and that's it. We have a soul journey, and so I believe in past lives and reincarnation. That's what I believe in my soul. I just know that to be true for me. And we come here to learn lessons, and if we haven't learnt the lesson before, then we come back to try and do better this time. And I know I have a lot of lessons to learn in relationships. I know that I call that karma, but someone else might call it something different. And it really doesn't matter what terminology we're using. The point is, if there's something that's really, really tough for us, that is the most difficult thing, whether that is relationships, whether that is self-worth, whether that is money, whether that is business and accomplishments, whether that's family, whatever it is that we find the most difficult is probably our work here in this lifetime. That's the thing that we really need to focus on, because it's our biggest work. Where it's our biggest struggle, there's a lot of room for growth. And so with me, that is relationships. I was a very different person a decade ago. You and I have a mutual friend, and a decade ago, when I first met our mutual friend, I was in a very different headspace, and relationships were this very chaotic thing. And now, having moved through a lot of it, it's very different for me. But when we struggle with something, that's our karma, if you like. That's what we're really here to work on. And I think if anyone's listening to this and thinking, I just don't know what I'm here to do, look at what is the most difficult thing for you, and the thing that when you work on it, you feel the most amount of satisfaction and or the most amount of growth. That's usually what it is we're here to really focus on.
Okay, that's some good advice there. I want to focus on you, and we had the chat before to say there's no space we can't go.
Yeah, I know.
Slight regret now you're in front of a therapist, but
yeah, a little bit like I'm squirming, but go
on. I guess I'm just interested in you said it took you 10 years, a decade to sort of work through your relationship stuff.
Yeah.
And you were a very different person 10 years ago. What would you say, looking back, you realize maybe some of your patterns or ways of relating, or how did you come to realize that, or maybe I need to change my way of relating and who I am in relationships?
Yeah. So the pattern was, for me, really over attaching to one partner, like finding someone that I really, really liked, and just like they're the person, they're the one. That was the terminology I used a lot. And it would be really interesting because it would be all about how I was feeling, and how I was feeling was not, I was not very emotionally healthy. So my feelings weren't really very reliable feedback. So it was all about how I was feeling, and it wasn't about what was going on in a really practical way. So I could be feeling really strongly for someone. I could think I was in love with someone, but that person was not really showing up for me. They were not really giving me a relationship. That person was not really sure if they wanted to be with me or not. And it would be this really interesting push and pull of finding someone I really cared for deeply, who just wasn't sure whether they wanted me around, and wasn't sure if they wanted a relationship with me. And for me, it came, and this is kind of what I do with other people too, it's looking at, well, what's the pattern and where did it come from? Because you can do all the dating strategy in the world, and I certainly started looking into that, and it never stuck for me because I didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. And what it's about really is, who was the first person you had a relationship with that was not available to you? If that's the pattern, how is that familiar? Where did that come from? So I went back to family. What was my family dynamic like? What was that like? What did I learn about myself when I was a kid that then started manifesting in all these relationships with men? So I went back to that. I have a trauma history as well, quite a checkered trauma history, and I'm 5 years sober, and I went through addiction as well. So there's a lot of things there. It wasn't just what's the pattern and where did it come from. It was also the complexities of the trauma that I'd been through that I didn't even know that I'd been through. I didn't know it was trauma. I didn't have the language to describe that. Some of the trauma that I'd been through, I locked it away, and I didn't remember it until much later, because that's what, I mean, you're the therapist, so you tell me, but that's what we tend to do, is we lock it away so that we can survive and so that we can get through it. And then I had moments of, oh, I was sexually assaulted when I was 15. Oh shit, let's have a look at that, right? And it was, for me, it was counseling that really saved my life in many ways, because I went through coaching, which was really powerful, but then I went back and went through counseling when I realized that all this trauma had led to a lot of really funky patterns in relationships. And so it wasn't even about the relationship pattern. It wasn't even about why am I clinging to men? It was, what have I been through? And let's start there and let's heal that. And then let's deal with the dating stuff. It was absolutely my stuff and nothing about the person I was dating.
So it sounds like you rather than looking at the symptoms and kind of focusing on a symptom-led approach of, well, I need to stop doing this, start doing that. And oftentimes I see in some of the dating advice, it's so much gameplay. You really wanted to go back to the source of, where did this behavior kind of start? How did I learn it? And all that kind of stuff. And something that you mentioned about kind of trauma being locked away. Yeah, you articulated it really well. When we're traumatized, the mind goes, can't deal with that. Shove it in a filing cabinet, lock it away, and I guess it nags a little bit if it's there, and it shows up in our triggers and it shows up in our relationships. But how did you become consciously aware of it to do the work? What was the turning point? You mentioned counselling. Can you remember specifically when you had a bit of a, oh, it's that?
Yeah, I did. And it was actually, it was one of those moments, it was a light bulb moment. I was training to be a coach. I was in Vancouver. It was 2014. And we were doing this exercise in the coaching class. And it was about where emotions are in the body. And they were like, where do you feel this emotion? And everyone could locate it in their body. And I couldn't. And we did a number of these different exercises, like, where do you feel sadness? Where do you feel anger? And I'm like, I just can't feel it. And I just like kind of laughed it off. And I'm like, oh, I must be dead inside. Ha ha ha. You know, I thought it was really hilarious that I couldn't feel anything. And then I found it a bit concerning. I thought, well, why is it everyone can get this quote unquote right and I can't? Why can't I feel anything anywhere? Like, why is it that I can't feel my emotions? And then the emotions came back, and I remember I didn't consciously lock myself in my apartment, but I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days because I just started bawling my eyes out. I just started crying and crying and crying. And I started remembering the trauma, and there was something about that exercise that unlocked something. And I said, oh my God, I went through that. And particularly with the sexual assault, that was a big thing that I'd locked away that I didn't even comprehend that happened. And so the coaching school that I was in at the time was specialized to coaching and counseling. So I went to the school, the actual physical building, and they had counseling students there that were, you know, just qualified and looking for new people. And I was very fortunate to find someone that was very talented, who was new, but very, very gifted and talented, who worked through that. And then we went through other trauma, like severe bullying that I went through. I also witnessed a lot of violence, and that happened between the ages of about 13 to 15. And those traumas in and of themselves were pretty intense, but to have 3 happen within 2 years, I was like, it's no wonder I've been kind of fucked up. It's no wonder these things have really affected me. And when I started unraveling it, it was like it kind of like a tapestry where there's a thread and you pull the thread and then it all unravels and you're like, oh, what have I done? Look at all this. I need to put all this back together. And so it was that moment of understanding what I went through, and then I became aware of it. And once I was aware of it, I could then unpack it with a counselor. And that was, I mean, there's lots and lots of techniques, obviously, that can be used. There was lots of tears, lots of crying. We did an anger release therapy. It was really about getting the emotions out of my body, and as well as being consciously aware of what had happened and how it would have affected me. And that is probably one of the most intensely and deeply healing periods of my life. Once I became aware of that trauma and I could actually unpack it, it really joined the dots forward to other things that I'd been playing out in my relationships.
Did it ever feel too much? Did you ever feel like this is going to consume me? You talk about all this unpacking and you know, almost like going down a rabbit hole, I suppose.
Yeah.
In some sense, did you ever feel that sense of?
I didn't. I think that's because I had a really good counselor. I was seeing her every week. I was also in coaching school, and we met twice a week, and we had about 3 hours together where we could like coach each other. So I felt really supported. And I think that's the thing, you know, when you're unpacking this is having people around you that can hold you through it. And I was surrounded by coaches and counselors. So I was golden. It never felt like too much. It did feel really intense, but I think if anything, I was ready to release it. It felt like letting the top off like a fizzy drink bottle. It was kind of like all the pressure went out, and I'm like, oh, that feels better. It felt like a relief. It felt like a relief. Yeah.
What would you say to people who are listening? Because one of the things that I hear a lot in the therapy room is, I'm scared about what's going to come out.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody that, because it sounds like you weren't aware of this stuff, and then it was like, oh, and.
Yeah, well,
there's another box. Box.
It was like the never-ending handbag. You keep pulling items out, and there's still stuff in there.
Yeah.
Like, how deep does the thing go? Yeah, I'm sorry. What was your question? I talked over you there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was asking, what would you say to somebody that has a fear of unpacking? Like, is it going to be too much?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that support, like feeling like you're with the right practitioner, whether that's a counselor or whether you're a bit further along and it's a coach. It depends what you need. But feeling like you're really supported with that person and you feel 100% safe with that person. And also who else is around you. Because when you're going through that, it's really vulnerable. And so if you have like flatmates or you live with family and you're all coming back from a therapy session, it's like, what do you need in that environment? And is that environment able to provide that to you? So at the time I lived on my own, so it was really perfect. I could come back and, talk to the cat or chill out with the cat, and there was no judgment. There was no one else to deal with. But it was really important that my environment was set up so that I had support. So I would say, don't be afraid of what's going to come up. You probably will be surprised by what's going to come up, but this is about really loving yourself, and you can't truly love yourself if you don't love your shadows. It's about loving all of it. It's about looking at the trauma through the lens of love, if you like, if that's not too woo-woo, and being held by it and looking at it in this safe container. I'm sort of seeing like the client and the therapist and counselor, and in the middle is this kind of mass of trauma, and you're looking at it and you're like, here it is. Let's have a look and let's start taking it apart. And when you feel like you're in that safe container, you feel safe with them. You don't have to be afraid of what's going to come out of Pandora's box, because you feel like that person can hold you through it. And yeah, the other thing as well is making sure that the place that you go back to after the session, and when you're really going through it, if you feel very vulnerable and kind of fragile emotionally, that you're going back to a place where you're able to just decompress and just be with it, and not go back to an environment that's chaotic and that's going to re-trigger you. So yeah, I would say, don't be afraid of what's going to come out. That's the shadow work. We talk about light work quite a lot in spirituality, but shadow work is really where it's at, because that's where all the healing takes place. That's the stuff that we're not looking at, that when we look at it, then we get to the light and do so in a really genuine way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I guess from what you're saying is the therapeutic space and the safety of that space for you was like number one important, but also afterwards recognizing that it can feel a bit exposing. You can feel very tender once you've gone to those places.
Yeah.
I know certainly in my therapeutic work, when I have difficult sessions, healing sessions, the clients will come back the week later and say, I was absolutely exhausted after that session, and I suppose in a sense you've nodded to that the body holds trauma. So when we start releasing, it can have a real embodied sense of like an unburdening, like a physical unburdening. Made the hairs go up on the back of my neck as I said that, because I'm honoured to witness those moments with people. But powerful stuff, isn't it, when you go there? So don't be afraid, I guess is what you're saying, but make sure that you've got your safety and security in place, that you're not sort of going in doing that deep work and then going home to a madhouse.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, like the vast majority of people that have not started like the counseling and coaching journey, not that that's the only way that you can heal, but really it's a very foundational piece. Most people that are not doing that work and that skirting around the edges of, mindfulness is the hot topic in the UK. It has been for a while, and that's great. And just because you're quote unquote mindful doesn't mean you're emotionally healthy. Doesn't mean this is a bit controversial, I know, but it doesn't mean you're emotionally healthy, and it doesn't mean you're able to hold someone else through what they're going through. And so we hear the term holding space a lot in this work, right? And what holding space means is someone's ability to take what they're thinking and feeling and put it away in a little chest, a little box over here, so that they can be present with you. And that's what coaches and counselors do. Joe Public can't do that. Most people cannot do that because they're really in their emotions. And so if you come back to, like you said, a madhouse, those people there are not going to have the awareness, the self-awareness and the external awareness to say, Cheryl's just been through a really traumatic experience, or she's been through an experience of unpacking her trauma. Let's make sure we can provide a safe environment for her, because they're not even there. They don't even have that awareness in themselves, and they're probably not aware of their own trauma. So they can't be aware of what it's like to unpack it because they don't even know they have it themselves. Sure. So yeah, we've got to be really mindful, that word again, mindful of where we physically place ourselves after the session, because like you said, you do feel really tender and you feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions of therapy or anybody that's in the healing space is where you talked about holding space. People think that that's just sitting there and nodding non-judgmentally. And actually, when I did my therapy training, I went in there thinking, I'm going to learn how to analyze people and I'm going to learn how to understand how the mind works. And actually, I would say 80% of it was learning my triggers, going into my trauma, looking at my baggage. Because actually, if we don't understand it, if we're in the space of helping others and holding space with others, you're absolutely right. If we don't know what's ours and what's the client's, how can we possibly be holding that space for them? Because in session we can end up getting blended with that person's trauma.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a big wake-up call for me to have to go, oh, okay. And afterwards, I said these courses should come with a health warning, because you really have to go into it. But yeah, I like what you said there about sort of holding space and how you articulated that, because it's so important. And there are many people out there who aren't qualified therapists, and I'm quite passionate about this. I kind of sat there at one point in uni and said, why do we have to be here? We're just learning how to be good human beings.
It's true. True.
But it is a hard path, isn't it, to go on that path of inner work. And I wonder how do you feel about looking back at yourself 10 years ago? What feelings do you have about that person?
This is really good. I feel like I'm in session. I have a lot of compassion for her, and it's interesting. I feel this, not a disconnect, but a distance from her, because I know I'm not the same person. She kind of seems like a little sister to me now. I kind of look at her and I'm like, she was doing her best. She was doing the best she knew how. And I know that I'm not there anymore, and I know a lot more now. And I really believe everyone's doing the best they can with what they know and their current level of awareness. Everyone really is doing their best for the most part. And I was doing my best at the time. And so I look back at that, and part of me thinks, if I'd have known then what I know now, I'd have been a lot further along and all that stuff. But I kind of feel like I had to go through it, and it had to roll out in the way that it did for me to be here right now, for me to be at this point in my life. And, I'm in my early, nearly mid-30s. And it would have been great to unpack that trauma earlier, but I didn't. And I went through a lot of other things. After my trauma, there was a 6-year stint of addiction. So that was part of the story, and that was another chapter. But, the chapters in our life kind of, they roll out in the way that they're meant to, until we get to a point where we're like, I'm ready to change this story now, and kind of take the pen, metaphorically, and start writing the next couple chapters myself. But I look back and I have a lot of compassion for her, and I'm also glad that I'm not in that space anymore.
So kind of, it's in the past, you're not critical of it, you recognize it as being in the past. And I really like the fact that I'm constantly talking about compassion for the parts of ourselves being so important. So thank you for sharing that. You've mentioned your addiction a couple of times. Do you have a lens on addiction? I know different people have different theories about why it's there. What's your sort of take on it from your personal lived experience?
I heard a quote about addiction once, and this was when I first used the term addiction on myself, which is, addiction is the inability to stop a behavior or stop using a substance despite the negative impact it's having on your life. And so I realized that I had the inability to stop using alcohol. It was mainly alcohol, but it was also recreational drugs as well. And I can see now that, in a way, even though I wasn't consciously aware of it, it was a way of me numbing out. And so the trauma happened, for the most part, 13 to 15. Then, 16 to 18, I went to college. 18 to 20, I was in Canada and then Australia. I was traveling the world, having a great time. And I was also really running away from what happened. I didn't know I was doing that at the time, but I was. And I really started drinking at 18. So it's quite funny to me now. I can laugh about it, but it's interesting how I was very straight-laced and a complete, bookworm in school. And then as soon as I hit 18, I started drinking excessively, having never partied, never drunk, never done any of that. Hit 18, I'm like, I really, really like this. And I just became party girl. I had this like alter ego that was just, the life and soul of the party. And it was really, as I'm talking through this now, what I'm realizing is it was really a way of me being seen where I'd been very unseen before. And so it was also a way of me numbing out and feeling the good feelings, the euphoria, all of that, and not feeling the bad stuff until the next day and the come down and the hangover. So there was that period that the addiction chapter, if you like, was 18 to 24, where I went really down a path of alcohol and drugs. And it didn't look that bad from the outside. I had reasonably good jobs. At one point, I was living in Manchester, working in advertising, doing different admin jobs as well. And it looked like, a party lifestyle, like any young 20-year-old. But it wasn't so much what I was doing. It was the reason why I was doing it. And I was doing it to numb out. So when I heard that quote on addiction, I realized that it was a problem. And for me, I think I got sober at about 25. I was in Canada at this point. I emigrated to Canada at 24. And I decided to, I packed a suitcase, and lo and behold, I also packed some of my emotional baggage, and that came with me too. And I realized about 25 that I'd been blacking out when I was drinking, and I had periods of 4 hours where I had no memory whatsoever. So I started to research that, and I understood what was happening to my brain, and I decided to stop drinking. And I did it backwards. I got sober, and then I went into counseling and coaching. So I was sober for about a year before I went through any kind of therapy or any kind of 12-step program. And then I, relapsed and got sober again. But for me, the pinpoint was that moment was understanding that quote on addiction and understanding that I had the inability to stop despite the negative impact it was having on my life, despite how relationships would end up very chaotic when I've been drinking, despite how I would always be in very verbally, not physically, but very verbally violent interactions with the man I had feelings for at the time when I'd been drinking. And I look back now and again have a really interesting relationship with that young woman. And it was absolutely linked to trauma. I really believe about addiction. If you've had trauma, there will be addiction in some form. And if there is addiction, there will be some kind of trauma. For me, they're so inextricably linked. And that was certainly the case for me. So it was like there was the trauma bit, and then the addiction bit, and then the getting sober, and then deciding to get into this work professionally. So that's kind of how my timeline progressed, if you will.
Thank you for sharing that so openly, and I can sense that you've really got a handle on it too. Just noticing how you describe it, and this is when you've done the work, when you can talk about it. And of course it will always be there, but for you, I get the sense that you hold it compassionately as a part of your journey, as opposed to something that still triggers you.
Thank you.
Which is lovely to see, actually.
Thank you for recognizing that. That really means a lot to me.
You mentioned about addiction and quotes, and I saw one the other day that said addiction is the only disease that convinces you haven't got it. And I thought that was really kind of like, that kind of stood out to me, because I have my own history, and albeit it was a very short-lived experience when sort of a few years ago, but I suppose that quote says it all, really, doesn't it? And interesting that you said it was only afterwards that you were able to look back and go, oh, actually, that was an addiction. You said that the part of you, and it was when you sort of started to research blacking out, made the decision that, hold on a minute, this isn't good for me. I need to be sober. I suppose what I'm hearing as you're talking is the different parts of self. There was the bookworm that just wanted to kind of read all the time. There was the person that didn't feel that she was being seen and so wanted to act out. But then there was another part, by the sounds of it, that sort of stepped forward and went, "Hold on a second, I need to look after you." Do you have a sense of what that part of you is and where it came from?
I've never thought about it like that before. So you framed that really beautifully. The thing that's coming through right now is higher self, and I know that's a kind of a loosey goosey kind of term. I guess what it is this is a little bit like, are we in the Matrix right now? But when I was 24, I think it was my 34-year-old self that was coming through saying, you need to stop doing this. It's kind of like can't really explain it without sounding like I'm in a sci-fi movie, but it felt like a timeline jump. Like the more evolved version of myself came forward and said, this is what you need to be doing now. Just like my 44-year-old self right now is going, Cheryl, you need systems in your business. You need to look into your finances. You need to do this because this is where you're heading. So it's like, I feel like the version of me that's like 10 years on kind of somehow channeled information to me. I'm not sure how this works in a practical way, but how I understand it is it's the more evolved version of me that is able to somehow transmit information to my younger self. Sure. I'm not sure if that would hold up in court, but that's certainly how I understand it.
Sure, but that's your experience of it, and I suppose I really like the idea of there being a more grounded, kind of mature person within all of us looking out for us. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And my experience of that is, I might call it the higher self, actually. And when I articulate the higher self, I might say it's a little voice in my head that's very quiet but knows.
Oh, I love that.
And when I'm sort of walking down the street thinking about, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to buy this, the little voice will go, you don't need that, or you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But it won't be judgmental or critical or angry, or it's just almost like, well, I'm just going to give you what you already know. And then I'll step back. And I guess my experience of the work is about tuning into that voice more and trusting it. Some people call it intuition.
Yeah, I was going to say intuition, yeah.
Yeah, different people of different spiritualities and faiths. Some might call it God, some might call it, consciousness. I guess they're all explaining the same thing, in my opinion.
I think so too. It's just different terms, isn't it?
Sure. And you talked about mindfulness earlier, which is something I'm passionate about as well.
Oh dear, did I tread on your mindfulness toes there? I do apologise.
No, not at all. I think it is misused, and actually, we can forget that there are burning injustices in the world, and actually sitting on a cushion and meditating all day and pretending they're not there isn't helpful. I think my experience of mindfulness and how I use it in my practice is to allow, and you so beautifully articulated it earlier, the therapist in the room, the client in the room, and then there's this big ball of trauma in the middle. And if a client can witness their trauma rather than be their trauma and kind of get it out and go, what does it look like? What shape is it? What words does it have? What emotions is it feeling? Where was it born? When did it come about into my existence? Then that is a mindful way of doing the work. Because I think when you're triggered and when you're in it, and you're disassociating, which is when you're so flooded with trauma that the mind goes, can't deal with that. I'll go somewhere else. I'll check out. It's not helpful. But bringing that mindfulness, so I would agree with you. It is potentially misused and bantered round, and actually people for that reason I think dismiss it. But it does have a very, very powerful use if it's used in the right way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what you described, I would use the term self-awareness for that. But again, basically, we're talking about the same thing, and it's just semantics. So I think it doesn't really matter what we call it as long as we are doing the work. And doing the work is to be able to look at our triggers and figure out where they come from. And I think if people take nothing else from this today, I want them to take that, which is be aware of what your triggers are and where they come from, and work on healing that. That is the quote unquote the work that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things that often becomes a frustration when people are doing the work, and I think we've established what the work is now, is there seems to be a few phases to it. The one is unconscious. So I'm unconsciously acting out my trauma. or patterns that I've learned from caregivers that aren't useful to me. And there's kind of like I know that I'm not particularly happy, but I don't know why, so I'll just bumble on doing it. Then people either come to therapy, or they read a book, or they listen to a podcast like this, and they'll go, oh, that's me. I do that. And so they become aware. And that can sometimes be it's often an empowering stage. And there's a bit of an aha, I get me now. And there's I'll speak for me personally, I never speak for anybody else. I get a great deal of satisfaction from identifying what a pattern is and where it came from. The bit that I find most frustrating is the next phase, which is, but I'm still doing it.
Right.
So I know where it came from. I know what it is. I know how it manifests. And yet here I am still doing it. And I know that other people have shared that experience as well. In your experience, how do you take people from I'm self-aware to changing a behavior? What tool would you say is the most important, or tools?
Yeah, I think it starts to land then in meat and potatoes coaching. Like the counseling has done its beautiful work of healing the trauma, and then it comes into more of a coaching modality, which is, for those that don't know, counseling is usually based on working through things that are in the past, and coaching tends to look at things that are in the future. There's a lot more distinctions in that, but just in a really broad sense, that tends to be what it is. So it starts to move into coaching, which is, where are you at and where do you want to be, and how do we get you there? That's meat and potatoes coaching. And more advanced coaching is, why don't you want to be there? What do you fear might happen to you if you get there? And is there a part of you that actually doesn't know who she is or who he is without that old self? And so what our brains tend to do is they tend to stick to what's familiar, even if what's familiar feels like shit. So when it comes to dating, you're like, well, I know I date these men who don't really want a relationship with me, or dare I say, even have a partner already, right? And I know that's terrible for me, and it feels horrible. And I also know how that ends. I know that it ends in tears with me in front of Netflix and a tub of ice cream, right? What I don't know is what it looks like outside of that. And so your brain's going, kind of like how you explain trauma so beautifully. Your brain goes, I don't know what this looks like, so I'd rather stay with what's known because that's safe. So it's about really exploring what it could look like. So a question I would ask in session would be, what could that look like? What do you imagine you would look like without these patterns? What do you want to create, right? You can go through all kinds of visualization practices of, your higher self in 5-10 years. Where's she at? And what kind of person do you need to be? Who do you need to, what practical things do you need to be doing each day to become that person, that version of you? And then your brain starts to go, oh, it's familiar now. It's the person from the visualization. Oh, I get it now. I understand. It's a little bit like when we're driving to a new place. If we've driven to a town 50 times before, it's no big deal, and we know it like the back of our hand. If we're going somewhere new, we just don't have the image in our mind of what it looks like, and so we're kind of going off maps, and we're looking at the sat nav, and we're looking at the signs, and I take the first left here and all of this, and we have a map, but we don't necessarily know what the end destination looks like. And that's kind of like what the work is as well, is trusting in that higher version of yourself and really getting real about how you might be afraid of being that, and how, this is another next level question as well, is what part of your current patterns are serving you? What need is it meeting? And that might sound a bit confusing. Well, like, it's not meeting my needs. It feels horrible. Okay, so when you engage in a fantasy relationship with someone, when you are mentally dating them, but you're not in a relationship, how do you feel? Well, I feel kind of excited, and I get butterflies, and I feel all those like loved up feelings. Okay, so you're giving yourself the feeling of being in a relationship without any of the risk of intimacy. So there's a fear of intimacy there, and there's a fear of engulfment. So your patterns are serving you, right? We're not stupid. We're very, very smart. We get our needs met, and that can be a way of getting our needs met. So we look at that and we go, okay, you might be afraid of intimacy. So what's going on there? Let's unpack that, right? So there's a number of things. It's about telling our brain that it's safe to be something that's different and something that we don't know, and creating those new habits, whether those habits are, getting fit and healthy, or whether it's just not texting back the person we know is terrible for us, and also getting really honest about how our old stuff might have actually been helping us in some way. And once we can be aware of that, then we can move forward. So that's what I'd say about that.
I could listen to you all day. The way that you articulate things is fantastic. It's really clear, and I don't feel like I need to add anything to that other than to agree with it and say, yeah, I start from the basic premise with all clients, which is whatever you're doing for a reason, and that reason was probably born out of trying to protect you at some point, because that's what we're here to. We're here to survive. And I really liked what you said about, the familiar being a chosen path over the unknown, and the mind and the body says, so long as I'm not going to die, I'll stick to what I know.
Exactly.
Because over there is unknown. And if we go back like thousands of years, it might be, look, there's not a lot of food here, but there's food. So why would I range away from where I am to go into an unknown where there could be threats and all sorts? No, I'll just stay put, even though it's not great. And I really like the way that you articulated that.
That's a brilliant point, because that's probably where it comes from, isn't it? I never realized that it probably is just a safety evolutionary thing. Like, let's stay in this cave where we know there's some berries and there's the odd wildebeest roaming around, and we don't know what's out there. So let's stay where we are because it's safe. That's probably where it comes from. Wow. Sure.
So you talked about fear of intimacy.
Yes.
It's clear that you've done so much work on yourself, and I find myself just spontaneously smiling. I can see you doing the same. It's nice. It's nice to be around that energy. Turning to the work that you do with others, talk to us a little bit about that in terms of what are the familiar things that people present. So maybe give some examples of common relationship. I don't want to use the word traps, but you know what I mean.
Patterns,
Patterns, that's the word I was looking for.
There's actually 5 that I've identified, and I've created 5 archetypes, and there's a quiz on my website about this very, very thing. And some of the patterns I've alluded to as we've been talking. So there's a pattern that I call Miss Clingy, and this could be Mr. Clingy as well, but because I work with women, I've called it Miss. So Miss Clingy I was Miss Clingy. She finds someone she likes and clings onto him like an octopus with 8 legs, right? She clings onto someone, and there's a reason why she's doing that. There is Miss Fantasy Relationship, which I've alluded to as well, which is you're not dating someone. You've maybe had one date, or you've just seen them across the water cooler in the office, and you're like, that's the fella for me. You don't know if he's single or married or gay or straight, or you have no idea. But you're like, that locked eyes, target, and then you're like, oh, what would our children be called? Well, that's a dramatic example, but you know what I'm saying? You're like, oh, we'll go on this date and we'll start dating and we'll go here and we're going on a long weekend. And you're not even, you're 10 steps ahead of where you are right now. Like, let's start with the basics. Is he single? Is he straight? Let's start there, right? That's a good place to start. Like, would you potentially be able to date each other? Do you like each other? And then let's move it along slowly. So there's Miss Clingy, Miss Fantasy Relationships. Oh, my personal favorite, Miss Lone Wolf. That was me as well. And it's interesting how we can be all these things at once. And I'll get to why that is in a second. But Miss Lone Wolf she's someone that's been through a lot. And when she went through a lot, people weren't there for her. So if she can pick herself up in her darkest time, she can do everything herself. She's very proudly self-made. She's a career woman, just like me, moved herself over to Canada and got this career on her own. No one said she could do it. She did it on her own. # self-made. And she can't ask for support. She can't ask for help. I remember myself when I had some dental work done in Canada and took full advantage of the Canadian healthcare system while I was there. I got some dental work done. And I was having teeth pulled, and they said, hey, we're not going to knock you out, but we're going to give you some pretty strong stuff. Do you have someone that can come and get you after the procedure? And I'm like, no, I'm just 5 blocks away. So I'm walking down the street with gauze in my mouth, like woozy, dizzy. I didn't get a taxi. I'm like, I'm fine. Walked home and stopped and quite a few times and was nearly physically ill because I didn't want to ask for help. And today I'm like, I would not be doing that. I'd be calling up my friend Ismini or whoever would be local to me then. And I'd be like, hey, I've got this procedure I'm going to have done. Do you mind just driving me back? Or do you mind just coming with me to help me flag down a taxi? Do you mind helping me get home? But not Miss Lone Wolf. Like, when you're a lone wolf, you're like, I can do this on my own. And obviously that's a massive blocker to intimacy. And what we do is we stay away from intimate relationships, and Miss Lone Wolf can quite quickly flip and become Miss Clingy, because Miss Lone Wolf doesn't have a healthy model for what healthy connection looks like. So she just pushes it away. But then she likes someone and she clings. Right. So even though they're opposites, they're like different sides of the same coin because they're both dysfunctional. So they're three of the most common patterns. And with all of this, it comes back to the question again of, where does this come from? Like, why is it you're doing this? And that's not a rhetorical question. It's, there's a reason why you're doing this. Let's find out what that is. So I hope that helps people get a bit more clear on, like, you're not alone in this. When I was in my dating drama, I thought it was just me. I thought I was crazy. I thought that I just couldn't figure out this relationship stuff, but it comes from somewhere. And when we can figure that out and like join the dots, we go, oh, I do this because of this. And now I know that I can work through it, and it's not such a mystery anymore. So with the patterns, my whole work with people is identifying the pattern, finding out where it came from, and then moving forward through that. And sometimes my clients take a break and go work with a therapist for a bit and then come back to me because there's some trauma they need to unpack, and that's not my work and that's not my skill set. And sometimes they've been through a lot of therapy and they're like, I know I have this thing and I've healed my trauma, but I also have these relationship patterns. And then it's just a case of joining the dots. The trauma's already handled, but there's just not those connections made between what you went through and what you're doing now. So yeah, that's a lot, but it's all relevant. And I wish I'd known this 10 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of money.
Hopefully, which is, I think, what you're trying to do is help people who maybe need to know this now, you know.
I am. Yeah.
And I do believe that we all get the lessons at the right time. You know, maybe 10 years ago you wouldn't have been ready for them. But what was really encouraging about what you were saying there, and again was just a sign of your own healing, is that you recognise your own boundaries around the work that you're doing. And I see a lot of people in the sort of healing space who say, oh, I can do that, I can do this, I can do that. And actually, you know, maybe that says something about something that's unresolved for them, wanting to be, I want to help everyone. And I often think, well, maybe the camera, as you articulately said earlier, needs to be flipped actually back to you for a bit of time.
Exactly.
But it was nice that you sort of, you know, gave that away again. So, in terms of your work, I'm interested to know, because I follow you on Instagram, and you're very forthright. There's a sort of there's a no bullshit approach there.
Very direct.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm curious to know how your clients would describe working with you.
Oh, I actually did this as a marketing exercise a couple months ago. One of my friends who's she's a phenomenal coach and she's a former marketer. And she said, what you need to do is get 3 of your former clients on the phone and ask them these questions. And the questions are, and I'll just give these questions publicly because they might help someone. You can ask your clients, how did you feel before working with me? How did you feel after working with me? And how would you describe my work? And it was really illuminating because everyone said the same thing, which was very confirming for me. And what they said was, this was before I called myself a relationship pattern interrupter. This came from them. They were saying, you're great at spotting relationship patterns. Everyone said that. You're really great at being compassionate and giving it to me straight, but giving it to me kindly. So even though I am no bullshit, I'm also not a drill sergeant. I had another client who said, sometimes you hire a coach and they're like, I'm going to kick your ass if you don't do your homework. She's like, that's not you. You have this very Zen-like energy in sessions, which, by the way, I'm not very Zen now because this is a different container. But in sessions, you know, I'm able to put my stuff to the side and listen. And I listen to not just what's being said, but what's not being said. Like what's unresolved here? What am I feeling into that perhaps there's something that isn't being shared, or something that you don't want to say? Like, what is it you don't want me to know? That's always a good question to start with. And yes, they describe me as no bullshit, definitely. But getting to the heart of the matter and really getting down to what's going on. I'm not interested in the fluff. I'm not interested in text him these 5 perfect messages and you'll get married in 5 months. Like, that's not what I do. It doesn't work like that. I was on a call the other day with a good friend of mine, and we talked about something at length. And then my summary was, yeah, people are complex. And she said, that should be your slogan, people are complex. but people are complex, right? But yeah, that's how my clients would describe me, and I humbly agree as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Thinking about, we've talked a lot about therapy and coaching, and what I'm taking away from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is for you, self-awareness is massive.
Yes.
Bringing into awareness patterns of behavior, patterns of relating, so that they can then be worked on, and you can use that self-awareness, and you can use that sort of the power of self-awareness to instigate change. What would you say to people listening that maybe don't have access to a therapist or a coach? What could they be doing? I personally think that some of this work is difficult to do on your own. I'm not saying it can't be done on your own.
Yeah.
But for that therapeutic space, that holding of the space, if you've got somebody in your life that can do that, great. I'm personally always cautious about burdening a relationship and a partner with that responsibility. But is there something that people can do ahead of therapy or coaching to sort of start the journey?
Yeah, for me, a way of doing the work without a therapist or a coach is journaling. And I know that might sound like a really kind of innocuous tool, but actually, if you're asking the right questions and you have the right journaling prompts, it can be really, really illuminating. And it's one of the reasons why I include a lot of journaling prompts in my posts. So I don't just want someone to read a post on Instagram and be like, nice picture, nice caption, let's move on. I want people to actually move themselves through the process, because the reality is, the vast majority of people that follow us online probably won't work with us one-on-one, right? They're following us because they're inspired, or they, enjoy what it is we're putting out there. And so I always include journaling prompts. And that just really prompts us to dive deeper. You're basically coaching yourself if you're doing journaling prompts. And if someone else has given you the questions, especially if you're new to this, if you have a list of questions, you can just answer them in written form. And there's a lot of research out there to really support that writing it down on paper takes you through a process. Whereas if it stays in your head and you just think, oh, I'll just think about the answer, our thoughts are very cyclical. They very much go around in circles. Whereas if we actually write down the answer, we move ourselves through a process and move ourselves to a conclusion. So I would say that's a really good way to kind of coach or counsel yourself, if you can journal on it. And you can just Google like powerful questions to journal on. And I have some on my platforms as well, but that's a really great starting point.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Cheryl, your passion is palpable and your credibility speaks for itself. I know that you have an online platform.
Yes.
And you do online courses as well for people that might not be able to access therapy, which is why I asked the question and you very modestly didn't respond with your online stuff, which we can give it a bit of a plug here. So where can people find you online?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'd say I'm most active on Instagram at the moment, and my handles there are Cheryl J. Muir, or you can just Google my name and all manner of things come up, but you can certainly find me that way. And in terms of how to work with me, if you go to the link tree on my Instagram, it'll show you the different ways. I've got a digital course called Break the Cycle. I've got a coaching program that's enrolling at the moment for September, which is called Embodied and Empowered, and it's exactly about the work we've been talking about, and that's for a small group of women who are ready to do some group coaching together and really move through this. So that's Break the Cycle and Embodied and Empowered, and you can work with me privately as well. So there are three ways that you can work with me if you like the sound of me and I haven't freaked you out too much with my forthrightness and my passion.
I'll post links to all of that in the podcast description, and I would say to anybody listening to follow your Instagram stories because they're hilarious.
Oh, are they? I think I'm funny, but usually when people think they're funny, they're not funny at all.
There's some really nice behind the scenes stuff there, though, that I think is even if you just sort of want to tune in occasionally for a bit of a giggle, I really like the energy that you give off and the way that you share things so vulnerably and so openly. And as I said a while ago, it's clear that you've done the work, and I would feel that if I was working with you, I'd feel very safe to work with you. And that's just off, spending, what are we on, 50 odd minutes talking together. So yeah, is there anything that you'd like to add in at the end? A final takeaway? I mean, we've covered a lot. I feel like we've got through a lot.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody listening now that's maybe thinking, God, my relationship, I'm not sure if it's healthy, what would you say would be a good first step for them?
I think what I would say, first of all, is there's nothing wrong with you, right? You're not bad or wrong or broken or, stuck. It's all healable. Like we're able to look at this and unpack it through, whether it's coaching, counseling, courses, journaling, we're able to move through it, and you're not doomed in love. It's just about understanding, again, what's my relationship pattern? Where did it come from? And how do I heal this? And they're two very, very simple questions that, again, you could journal on or ask yourself. And the questions are simple, but they're not easy. The answers are not easy because it can be very complex, especially if we've got a trauma history. I just really want people to know, like, you will get through this. And I know that might sound a little bit trite, but it's actually what I needed to hear 10 years ago. Like, I just felt so consumed by it and so in it. But there's another side to it. And I'm not going to say it's all sunshine and buttercups and rainbows, because we're human beings and we have our moments and triggers come up, but you don't have to stay where you are. You can move through it, and you can create a completely different life for yourself, both in terms of your inner world and then what your exterior world looks like as well. But focus on your inner world over your outside, because nothing outside of you will make you feel good if you feel like shit yourself. And if you feel good inside, everything outside will reflect that. So go within first. That would be my parting wisdom.
Perfect. Well, that message of hope is certainly echoed by me. And feels like a really nice place for us to wrap up, although I feel like I just want to keep talking. So maybe in the future you would be kind and be a guest again, because I think
I would love that. We could do that in person when I'm in Manchester.
Definitely. Right, you take care, and we will speak again soon.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Listening back to that podcast to record this outgoing message, I was just smiling the whole way through it. Cheryl's energy is really infectious, and I would encourage you to go and follow her. I know that she predominantly works with women, but the lessons that are in there, from my perspective, are universal. So definitely check her out. She's at Cheryl J. Muir. If you can't find her, go on my Instagram or Facebook, because I will be resharing some of her posts following this podcast. As always, like, comment and share. It's really great if you can start spreading the love. We have a very loyal following, and I'm very grateful to you for that. But I want to get the message out more. I want more people to hear these stories, because I think they're so important. And the more that we can talk to each other, and the more that we can share our perspectives on the world, I think that can only be a good thing. So thanks for listening. There's some old episodes that you might want to go back and have a listen to if you're new to the podcast. Some great ones from a good friend of mine called Duncan, where we're breaking our mutual silences about early childhood trauma. And there's one of my good friend Nathaniel, who's currently touring in Edinburgh, actually, with his show First Time. You can listen to him talking about how he lives with HIV. So yeah, look back at some of those podcasts, have a listen, let me know what you think, share the love, tell your friends, tell your family, get listening, and look out for the next podcasts that are coming out, because I've got some amazing guests lined up for you, talking not only about their personal experiences, but also some experts coming on as well to share some hints and tips about healing. So I'll leave it there. Love always. Take care.